Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we are doing the Steam follow list cleanup. This is being done at the end of May for spring cleaning. What I'm doing is I'm going through games that I considered playing and covering for my YouTube channel, but I wasn't really sure if they were good enough to even be on my wish list. My wish list is the list of games that I do think are good enough that I would want to own and probably cover on my channel. There's a few games on the wish list that are maybe not YouTube friendly, so they wouldn't actually ever be covered until I can figure out a way to maybe cover that kind of content. Speaking of not YouTube friendly, we may run into some adult games, so I have a blur mode that I can activate. We'll probably use it a couple times. We'll be going through all the games starting with the letter E, and maybe even F, quite frankly, because there may not be too many games that start with the letter E today. And we'll be going for two categories of games that would classify them as something that I would be interested in. Either it's going to have a appeal in some way to me personally, or it's going to have a appeal in several ways to the general gaming public. So basically mob rule. So what I'm looking for and what I'm considering are games that have been out for at least 6 months and have any number of reviews, or games that have been out for less than 6 months and have over 20 verified purchase reviews, which is what this number means on Steam. There can be more reviews, but they're from people who activated the key or got the game free. So this game, Eat All the Things, from a developer called Eat All the Games, which I think this pretty much is an admittance when you name your LLC, when you make your company, when you fill out those corporate paperwork. If you name your developer company Eat All the Games, and then the first thing you release is called Eat All the Things, you're kind of admitting that you don't really plan on making a sequel game or any other kinds of games. Whereas if you look at EA, it stands for Electronic Arts. Ubisoft stands for Ubiquitous Software. Nintendo, at least by the old rumor, meant Luck of the Heaven in Japan. Yeah, none of those names have anything to do with the first game that was made by EA, or the first game made by Ubisoft, or the first game made by Nintendo. Which there might be some slight wink and nod to that, but not directly. Even King, the developer of Candy Crush, didn't call their company Candy Saga or the Candy Company. This is an easy game to immediately just remove from the follow list, though. It's 63% positive. It's asking $6.99. From the screenshots that load right now, I am using a lot of RAM, so some screenshots will just not load. It seems like it is at times a 3D platforming adventure game, and then at times it converts into kind of a 2D platforming game. And I could see my desire to see if something like this would turn out to be good, because any Super Mario 64 style clone adventure games would be interesting. Unfortunately, there haven't been a lot that are actually good. So yeah, we're looking at the release date as a metric. We're looking at the number of views and how many are positive. We're looking at the price tag. If I run into any games that are multiplayer only, they need to be eliminated probably at that point, because I don't really play multiplayer games. It's basically impossible in my mind. I don't know how to criticize as a video game critic multiplayer games, because your experience will vary very much depending on whether you're playing with friends, or whether you're playing with random people, or whether you're just having good luck with the people that you're randomly matched together with, or if you're having bad luck in multiplayer games. And frankly, they're just not the kind of games I've ever wanted to play. We'll be keeping an eye on the languages, the main factors that we're looking for as far as languages are if it's English and Chinese, traditional Chinese, or simplified Chinese, or English and Russian. Unfortunately, this is stereotyping a little bit, but there is a ton of low effort, poor quality Russian troll games. There's a ton of low effort, poor quality Chinese games on Steam right now. So you kind of, if you're not certain and you see that those are the only languages being supported, that's kind of a bad marker. And then in general, if we have to come down to the reviews, which is not the case in this example, I'll only be trying to skim the negative reviews. I really don't care what a positive review says, and we may keep a small eye on just the numbers of games that were bought through Steam directly versus the number of games that were activated via Steam key, because that means potentially the creator of the game gave the Steam key to somebody who promised to give it a positive review. And we haven't seen a lot of vote manipulation and review manipulation, but I've seen a little bit of it. Of course, an extremely short, not recommended review that just says nope is not very helpful either. Also on the languages, if we're talking a visual novel that potentially is going to have between 30,000 to 300,000 words, if it doesn't have full audio in English, that's a consideration also, because then that means I'm going to probably have to read the entirety of all of those words out loud, which would just ruin my voice quite terribly. So yeah, first game was easy. Let's move to the next game. Next we have a game called Econ, the Elemental Connection, which this seems like this is a board game style that's been converted to a digital format. It seems pretty simplistic. You're just having to match the sides and getting points because of that. I'm pretty sure I saw when I was in school a game very much like this. That being said, this is also the style of game that I would classify as a single screen Unity game, where the screen does not ever slide or change, and there's like not really a character that moves around. And often single screen Unity games feel cheap or just made from a mobile cell phone port. When you see a lot of buttons on the screen, like you have maybe a main menu screen and then you go immediately into the level, or maybe there's a level select screen in between it. That's kind of simplistic. This is a game that does not meet the relevancy test because it doesn't have even 20 reviews. It came out December 14th, 2018. It's $2.99, so it's not asking really a lot. It feels like a game that very potentially could be on sale at some point for 69 cents, which I think is the lowest price. It has 13 achievements, which is kind of high considering the price, but not an extreme amount of achievements. This, I think, though, really just falls into being an irrelevant game. And sometimes, well, quite often actually, board games, card games, the Uno game that is on Steam right now, at least one of the Monopoly games that are on Steam right now, are very poorly programmed and very poorly received. And probably you could, there's a chance, I'm not 100% sure, you could play this on using Tabletop Simulator, which would be a probably better choice to buy. Tabletop Simulator being $20, but allowing you to play lots and lots of tabletop style games. So if this was hugely appealing to me, I might override the fact that it really isn't relevant and nobody's reviewed it, and think that maybe this is a hidden gem in the rough that, well, just a hidden gem in general that people haven't seen before, but honestly, I don't think that that's the case, and I've played enough of these simplistic puzzle games and covered enough of them. So this is another game that will leave the follow list. In fact, let's be honest, a lot of games have left the follow list so far, working up to games starting with the letter E. And I think that is going to be the consistent issue here. These were the games that were potentially under consideration, and so they were iffy in the first place. What has happened since I first looked at these games, because I first looked at most of these games the day they came out on Steam, so they had no reviews. And I saw that because I look at almost every game that comes out on Steam every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday while I'm streaming Hearthstone. I'm talking about games that came out on Steam. And yeah, the vast majority of the games that come out are not even good enough to make it to the follow list. So this is the second filtering process. This game, Edge of Eternity, looks like a JRPG. I'm in a weird position with JRPGs, and it's kind of the same position I'm with visual novels and fighting games, and probably several other categories of games, where I'm not sure what the order or what the list of the important JRPGs in this example are. A game like Edge of Eternity does not seem like it is part of any series. Final Fantasy would be a bad comparison because most Final Fantasy games also don't connect their stories, but the Dragon Quest series would be a good comparison. There's somewhat some linearity and connectedness to the Dragon Quest series. Although I guess for JRPGs in particular, each game is so long and so big that they all do act mostly as standalone games. And that is also a big fear of any RPG, whether it's a Japanese RPG or just a different country's RPG, is how long a game like this would want to be played, or how much time I'd have to commit to it. So this came out December 5th, 2018, and it's rated very positively, but it's still early access. And I'm not willing to play any early access game. So because of that factor, then I have to consider what am I going to do otherwise with this game, because I can't really add it to the wish list. I either give it 6 more months or I say it's had its time, forget it. At 80% positive of 526 reviews, I think I'll give it another 6 months, but more than likely by the time I get around to doing this a second time, it is a game that won't make the cut. You really, even for a JRPG, early access doesn't seem like it's too necessary. The only games I would give the benefit of the doubt to for being in early access are games with a considerable online component, multiplayer games for the most part, and 6 months is still about as much time as I'm willing to give them, because either you're going to be able to get your game to a finished sellable point or you're not. And I really do consider early access really just a beta, and I don't see really the difference logically, whereas a lot of early access labeled games on Steam are just labeled that way and stay labeled as early access for all of eternity, because the game developers got their initial sales from during that early access period, and now they don't think that they could recoup their money if they continued to work on the product, so they sell an unfinished product. And the number one thing I don't want to play ever, if regardless of any other extenuating circumstances are unfinished products. Although on occasion I will play games like that. Next we have Elderborn, which is, I guess, the exact same issue, although in this case it is 90% positive and it only has 42 verified purchase reviews. So the active player base for this game is lower, which, if the developers are looking at the numbers of people who are actually playing, or at least actively willing to review it, this is much less likely to get finished than the previous game we were looking at. So at $19.99, this apparently is still being updated, but I really don't have faith in this. It has only 3 achievements, which really doesn't mean anything. It's full audio in English. We could try to go and look at the negative reviews. Or it just says meh. That's one negative review. Let's see. I could, and sometimes might, come over here and select the negative reviews. There's only 4. But this might not load again because about 70% of my 16 gigabytes of RAM is being used right now, and that will swing upwards and downwards kind of randomly. I don't think this needs to stay on the follow list. Quite frankly, if a game did come out of early access after 6 months of being in early access and was a finished product, that by today's standards would be breaking news and would get reported on. So yeah, I'm trying to raise my my limitations, my rules, the quality of games that I'm willing to play. So yeah, Elderborn, not making it to the wish list, leaving the follow list. Next we have a game called Aliyah Episode 1. It's an episodic game, so even though this is allegedly a finished product at $2.99 on sale right now, it's not really a finished product because Episode 2 seems to be nowhere. I don't see any links or mention to it or any kind of bundle. The last update for this was December 11th, 2018. It was released September 6th, 2018, so that's a long time. It's 66% positive. I almost certainly, if I come down here and can see the negative ones, there will be something here mentioning that the game is abandoned, although this review says that the game doesn't have a consistent gameplay style. It's part action, part walking sim, part adventure puzzle, if that's what I'm skimming from that review. And yeah, you run into that case where games look really good because there's a decent artist making the game, but a bad game programmer. And it really makes a lot of sense that a game programmer wouldn't be a good artist, or a good artist wouldn't be a good game programmer. That's why most video games are developed by teams of at least 10 or 20 people. So yeah, I'm seeing a variety of complaints and then negative reviews, and didn't really need to read the reviews at all. So yeah, Aliyah Episode 1. And it is worth mentioning that while some of these screenshots look rather highly polished, like this looks really good, this also is kind of standard for a Unity store or Unreal Store asset flip game. You don't get me wrong, you would be buying a lot of assets to fill this room with computer screens and panels and devices. You would not be doing it on the cheap for sure, but every single thing here doesn't really have to be designed by the actual creator of the game. A hallway like this, textures and walls and things like that, all could be Unity asset flips by nowadays. So you often will see horror games in particular that look rather good, but actually play really terrible. And this is another game that's an example of looking really good and playing really terribly, from what I can tell. So let's move on. I don't want to spend a lot of time. The last recording I made went for 4 hours because there's just so many games starting with the letter D. Next we have a game called LOL, which is a narrative sitcom game about a person trying to go pro in today's esports industry. Between August 8th, 2018 and now, there have been so many controversies and weird things that have happened in esports that this game kind of falls out of being relevant because of that alone. But in a weird way, I would also say this is a game where you're playing somebody's job or running a simulation of somebody, or a visual novel of somebody trying to have a job. And don't let this confuse you. This is almost certainly a cutscene and you don't actually play the game at all. Seems like the gameplay mechanic is more like Telltale games where you can admire, tease, and flirt through conversations. This is an early access still. It's had more than 6 months. It did update to go to conventions, but that doesn't really mean anything. You've just kind of failed to. You've released your game far too early. You really need a finished product before you go on Steam, in my opinion. There is really no curation, or very little curation, of games on Steam, so it falls onto the community of people who actually buy games and the developers who actually publish games and publishers who publish games to curate themselves and control themselves. And frankly, they need a 90% finished product, in my opinion, to be on Steam. If you want to release something in early access earlier than that, you probably would want to do something like an Indiegogo, a Patreon, or Kickstarter, and release demos off your own website. Or, even you could have a page on Steam and release a demo, but the early access model, where you have an incomplete product and it stays incomplete for a very, very long time, is not acceptable. And that really highlights the problem with game development in general. If your game is a indie game being developed by one person in their spare time, it's going to take you probably over 4 years to make that game. If your game is a AAA platform game that's coming to consoles and PC, and millions upon millions of dollars are being put into it to be developed, it's still probably going to take you 4 years to develop a game. So if you 2.5 years into development put it on early access, it still is going to need another 1.5 years of people now seeing your game, making snap judgments, seeing that it's not good, and giving it bad publicity. You can only make one first impression in life, and early access gives a bad first impression of your game. This game, Emerald Shores, again, came out November 21st, 2018. It has 2 user reviews. It's not relevant. Seems to be NES-inspired style of games with several different styles of games, and I wouldn't be surprised if these are closer to mini games than actual games. It's $9.99. It says there's an Easter egg for a 2-player mode. That's weird. I wouldn't call that an Easter egg. And of the 4 reviews being shown to me, they are all positive. So this game is 100% positive, and it, to its credit, is not early access, but it's just not relevant either. There's no reason to cover this. So moving on. Next, we have a game called Emergency 20, which is 70% positive of 250 reviews. And apparently, Emergency 20 is actually the 20th game in a series called Emergency. This is tagged as a real-time tactics strat simulation co-op game, where you play as first responders, which is not or you control first responders. It's not a bad idea. I really do want to play a game built around this concept. So this passes the test. It is relevant. It has more than 20 reviews. It came out October 31st in 2017. I guess we could look at the Emergency franchise. It's been given maintenance. It has an online multiplayer element too. 10 of the best missions from 20 years of Emergency games to your PC using the current technology. Additionally, it features Emergency 5, Emergency 2016 and 2017 with all the campaigns, multiplayer maps, and free play mode. That's pretty good. And you can see it supports full German language. This definitely feels like it's probably a German game. So the only thing that would change my mind about this going to the wish list is if I look at the Emergency franchise here and find that there's something newer. And there isn't, but there is something slightly concerning in that there are only mixed reviews for Emergency 4 on Steam, and Emergency 2 doesn't even have enough reviews. Emergency 3 doesn't have enough reviews, and Emergency 2014 is mixed. Emergency 3 is mixed also. So it seems like this series has been mediocre up until this point, and they took all the good games and put it together as a bundle, which or all the good levels. That's not a bad idea. I bet there's a decent number of old games where if you just did some curation and made only the good games playable, and as long as if there's a story, it still makes sense. That works fine. So this is the first game that's actually making it to the wish list. Next, we have a game called Empires of the Undergrowth. I'm always looking for an insect style game. There aren't really a lot of them, and they aren't really that good. This also would be classified as a dungeon keeper clone in my mind, because you're running this civilization and building in underground hives and nests or ant beds. Unfortunately, for as positive as this is, which is 91% of 1,080 reviews, it came out December 1st, 2017, and it's still labeled early access, which means they've either abandoned it or there's just a complete lack of faith in how much content you've made. They're calling it version 0.2.23. So if they've gotten to 0.2 in a year and a half, that like another 8-7 years before it could come to version 1.0. It also is a little suspicious that it supports simplified Chinese, but not super suspicious. So let's see the 100 negative reviews. Let's see. Why not have Chinese negative review? Very hard, but they have so much that this is the best. The game is very hard. Well, it's fun at first, but the novelty wears off in a few hours. Not a lot of content, and doesn't get updated a lot or very often. Either wait until it's on sale before you purchase it. This person has 46 hours on the game. It has potential, it lacks contents. It's unbalanced in some cases, buggy game modes and difficulty settings. So, yeah. I feel like a game where you play as an insect or a good dungeon keeper clone, there's very few options on Steam that work out here, and this seems like this is just another case of that, where this was a concept that then stopped getting worked on, or just doesn't have enough people working on it. Feels like it's a side project, and I really cannot give any more time to this. It's been in early access since 2017, so Empires of the Undergrowth are leaving. Unfortunately, I added probably about 5 games onto Steam that were ant or insect style games in similar veins, and all 5 of them feel like they've failed to be successful enough. Next we have this game called Epic Loon, which I think is a really crazy game. It's I think if it's the game I'm thinking about, a platformer where you select a level, and each level is a recreation of famous movies like Alien or Godzilla, and then you're just jumping around those areas. Here's Jurassic Park, that's Alien. There's definitely some weirdness here. This got a little bit of mainstream coverage, and it's 94% positive of 18 reviews. So I think what this really comes down to is it's a lesser known sort of gem in the rough, hidden gem. There's only 3 negative reviews, only one of which is in English. Maybe the control schemes might be bad, but I don't really buy that from one negative review. Mob rule overrides that by far. What I could say is this game came out July 12th, 2018, and this developer and this publisher are completely unheard of before or since that point. So if this was supposed to be a breakout game that would lead them to making more products, they've failed to announce anything new. But by my standards, Epic Loon will go on the wish list. It is fair to say there's a lot of games on the wish list, so this would probably need to get down to $4 or $3 on sale before I'd even consider it. And when I am considering it, I'm considering it against potentially 1,000 other games on the wish list that it might have a lot more relevancy, a lot more reviews, and might catch my eye or interest me a lot better. Next we have Epic Skater 2, which doesn't look terrible, but again falls out of relevancy because it has only 8 user reviews. A skateboarding game that's more of an arcade point style skateboarding game would interest me. I was a fan of a Wii game called Tony Hawk's Downhill Jam, which is about the least Tony Hawk game you could have played, and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 would be a much better skating game if you're into skating and know all the tricks and moves, where Downhill Jam is very much about just randomly pushing buttons and getting scores, which is my level of skill for these types of games. The name, I would argue, is a little low effort too, calling your game Epic Skater 2. I assume there's an Epic Skater 1 from this developer, but even if there isn't, it kind of is just not creative enough. They want $14.99 for it, which is pretty expensive. They have 100 achievements, which makes it feel like an achievement game almost certainly, because 100 was the maximum amount of achievements you could give for a game. And there's only one negative review. It says the main menu is terrible, gameplay is fun. The gameplay from the screenshots does seem like, and yeah, a lot of these screenshots are broken, it does seem like it's kind of a mobile game that you're collecting coins and then having to unlock maybe levels or costumes or something with this coin. You see a lot of games that have a in-game currency for no real reason, and it feels like they were thinking about planning on having a way of purchasing that in-game currency, but there's no link here that says in-app purchases, so that didn't really happen. There's no DLC to buy more coins. But when you have an in-game currency that is used to clearly unlock something, that is also an example of them stretching out the content and making you grind. Next we have a game called Epitaph. Let's see, what is this? It's tagged Action Puzzle Exploration. So I'm thinking it is a walking simulator style puzzle game. You discover an ancient portal, you find yourself among the remnants of an ancient alien civilization. Now the creators of Myst made a game that was basically that exact same description. And I played that and covered it. I don't remember the name. It was called Abduction. Yes. And frankly, I would trust the creators of Myst. I wouldn't trust really anybody else for that kind of description. But I am looking at this game, and it does feel like a laser puzzle game inspired by something like Portal. Although, in fairness, it probably is a little bit closer to the game The Talos Principle. I felt like maybe this game would have been an asset flip game, but now as I'm seeing more content and actual gameplay mechanics, I really wouldn't call it an asset flip. Even if all these assets are pre-bought, they're not being flipped, they're being used to actually make a game. With the concept of the phrase flipping is like house flipping. If somebody's flipping a house, they're just painting the walls and making the visible parts look good without addressing any of the underlying issues of a house and actually improving the value or the usability of a house. As much as they can get away with, at least. This looks like a real game. $19.99. It's selling a soundtrack, which means nothing. Plenty of bad games sell their soundtrack. It's 76% positive or 26 reviews. This also came out May 1st, 2019. So this isn't a game that's even been out for 6 months. It's just a game that when I first saw it, I put it on the follow list because I wasn't certain. And I wanted to see at least 20 reviews. Now I see 20 reviews. It can just be elevated to a wishlist game. Here's Abduction. In comparison, Abduction. I would complain a little bit about Abduction since you're really doing only one puzzle throughout the entire game. There's really only 2 styles of puzzles that you work with. But it is a nice set of environments that you can walk around and look at. The Witness, another 3D puzzle game. Antichamber, another game I've covered. These are some of the great ones that I've already covered. I think I've probably accidentally covered the good ones and missed all the bad ones. Let's see. They're saying it's not a sci-fi adventure exploration game. The puzzles are too simple, according to this review. So I imagine half an hour for this, half an hour for this, 5.5 hours for this, 2.7 hours, half an hour for this. I imagine this probably is close to 30 minutes to an hour of gameplay. So $19.99 might be a consideration at that point, because it probably is a somewhat simplistic and smaller puzzle game. Since there is this developer I haven't heard of before. Again, naming their company Epitaph Games, and then their first game is called Epitaph. But yeah, that's going to the wish list. Next we have another adult game that would require me to log in. I think if I'm going to continue to run into adult games like this, it is easiest just to ignore these. So yeah, this was probably a adult game that maybe had some nudity in the screenshots, maybe didn't. Steam is going through some growing pains and working through that. They really should have always curated what screenshots and what video trailers were allowed on their storefront, and they kind of didn't when they started introducing and allowing games with nudity and sexual content on their storefront. I have no problem with the games being uncensored. I want the games to be uncensored. I just want the storefront to be somewhat family friendly. So almost certainly, if you're gonna bet the odds, this is a anime visual novel sex game that I'm gonna skip over. And that won't be the case every time, I don't think. And I would not be surprised if here's a Western equivalent of a anime visual novel game next called Room Escape Secret of the Hidden Room, The Collaborator, which that is not a game that starts with the letter E. But when you see the title here, and this is ridiculous that the titles can be different in one place versus the other, it's called Escape Secret of the Hidden Room, The Collaborator. So they at some point changed the name. This kind of doesn't matter. This is a Western bad animation style that does not appeal visually. This looks pretty bare bones and boring. This is probably the equivalent of a mobile game with some simplistic escape to room puzzles that you have to deal with, and it's probably really short. Also, it's $4.99. It came out August 8th, 2018, has 2 reviews, neither of which are actually in English. They're both in either Chinese or Korean or Japanese. Probably Korean, considering Korean's the only language here. So I'm calling this a Western art style. I guess maybe this is just a bad animator out of Korea that made the game. That could also be the case. I'm just certainly not certain how to classify something like this. But yeah, this is leaving the fall list. There's no reason. It has no relevancy and it doesn't look that good. I'm a little surprised it's on the fall list in the first place. Next we have a game called Escape Lala Retro Point and Click Adventure. So visually this looks like a pixelated retro point and click adventure game, which is what they're going for. So it makes it a little hard to trust or want to play a game like that, because a lot of bad games claim to have the retro visual style as an homage when really they're just bad animators. However, relevancy overrides that when you have a game that has 56 reviews and it's 98% positive, unless there's just a ton of review manipulation being done here, which I kind of don't believe. I suspect this is probably a slightly better thought out point and click adventure game than older games would be. It's also free, so the price is right, but that doesn't mean much. There's also a sequel. So this is episodic, which is something to consider. So there's 1 negative review and it's not even in English. So as far as I know, there is no way to remove negative reviews on Steam. So I don't know how you do that. I am seeing a lot of games that are activated by keys, however, but those keys activations would not be considered in the 56 mentioned up here. It says it's in English. I suspect there's some review manipulation going on here though, because we're seeing a lot of Russian reviews and that doesn't make sense. Why would the game be reviewed in Russian when it doesn't support Russian? Why wouldn't all of these language reviews be in English? So I think this might be a bit of a review manipulated game, and so I think I'll eliminate it for that reason. This game is not out yet as a sequel, and I don't know if this game is planning on coming out as free continuation, or if this game is going to actually sell for a price. Because it would make a lot of sense to release a free game, manipulate the reviews to make it look like it's a good series, and then get people to buy the sequel based on a manipulated reviews of the predecessor. I guess where this just comes down to, though, is that this game, well, is just going to be removed from the follow list. I don't see how we do anything else other than that. So Escape La La, retro point and click adventure, it's leaving the follow list, and it's not a big loss really, even at that, because I suspect review manipulation, and because it's just a old looking new game. I would prefer to just play the old games and play things that are actual classics. And once I've played all of the classic old looking games, I'm fine with never playing any more old games that exist. Particularly point and click adventures, it would probably take a lifetime to play all the old point and click adventure games that have some nostalgia built around them. Next we have a game called Escape Legacy Ancient Scrolls. This is an escape the room game. I think it also has maybe an element of hiding from somebody, maybe. What you can see here, though, is a character that's actually being depicted, and hands that are actually being depicted, and gameplay elements that look like actual gameplay elements, instead of a lot of Escape the Room games which seem to be designed only for VR. This game is VR non-VR, so I can put it on the wish list, whereas if it was a VR only game, I'm just going to leave it on the follow list, because well, frankly, I'm almost certainly never going to buy a VR headset. It says it has over 10 hours of gameplay and 10 levels with 80 plus rooms to explore. That seems like a lot of gameplay, quite frankly. This seems like a real game. It's 78% positive of 23 verified purchase reviews. Let's see what the negative reviews say. There's 5 of them. Very slow going. Also, mini game functions not working. I played this game for like a couple of hours and decided that it doesn't have much to offer. Also, I could find no way of saving my progress. This was in February 11th. This was December 3rd. Maybe there's been an update between then. Maybe not. I could see, yeah, December 17th was the last update. I could see a instance where an escape room, whether a VR game or just a virtual video game escape room, would be confusing and difficult for most or a lot of people. So I could also see escape room games not selling greatly or playing very well. But yeah, this meets the requirements, and it's not in early access, at least it says it's not. So I think there's a complete product here. So I'm willing to play it, and by putting what is probably just a pre-bought 3D model of a human character in there, you humanize escape room games and make them look like a AAA game a lot better than if you were looking at every single one of these screenshots from the perspective of a faceless character, which is what you would see in almost every other escape room. So yeah, that's going to the wish list. Maybe I'd never actually get around to playing it. That's true for any game on the wish list. Next we have Eternal Card Game. Because I play Hearthstone every Monday, Wednesday, Friday while I'm talking about video game news and looking at new games that came out on Steam, I'm always looking for a potential replacement for Hearthstone. Let's face it, Hearthstone's been out for a long time and it can get repetitive and boring and long. That being said, nearly every collectible card game or deck building game on Steam does not have a big enough player base or does not have enough quality in the development to work, including Valve's own Artifact game. This is 77% positive over its lifetime, but it seems to be 68% positive in the last 30 days. So they're losing attention as far as people. And while it does have 4,487 reviews, that may still not be enough player base for people playing card games. It's free to play, online multiplayer mostly with in-app purchases. It's going to have a third-party end-user license agreement and account required. Let's see if we can get into the nitty-gritty with some negative reviews. There's over 1,000 negative reviews. Super enjoying this game until I noticed the paywall. Too long, didn't read. At first it was great fun, now it sucks. See, the game itself has a great start, fun mix of mechanics and well-known and beloved trading card games, smooth and rewarding gameplay. Months later, now it seems the gameplay is either broken or broken on purchasing. Quite some time has passed since my last purchase with real money, which seems to have caused the game logic to respond in a few ways. Blah blah blah. It can be fun, but if you don't have new cards, just be prepared to farm, pay money, or lose. This is your standard collectible card game complaints of the game becoming pay to win, and I think that's pretty much what happened here. It is still getting updates and still getting covered, but this is a game I would also say has not gotten any mainstream press coverage. I don't recall ever seeing anybody talk about Eternal Card Game, which is a pretty low effort name. It looks basically exactly similar to Hearthstone in the layout and gameplay mechanics, so there's not doing anything much different, and so I think you would almost certainly want to play Hearthstone over this. So this is another game that can leave the fall list. Almost all the card games are going to leave the fall list. Next we have a game called Internam, which this is from Pico Interactive. If I recall correctly, Pico Interactive gets old games and re-releases them through DOSBox emulator or some other emulator. And that probably is the thing that made me put this game on the fall list, because I was saying, well, this clearly is an old game. Somebody must have some nostalgia for it. Since then, I've raised my quality and standards. So even if this is a game that people have nostalgia for, it's not a game I have nostalgia for, and it's not a game I really want to play. $6.99 for something, while it says it came out February 8th, 2018, probably came out in the early 90s or maybe even mid 80s. There's kind of nothing here that I think would make me want to play this. There's 2 negative reviews, not in English. Yep. This is actually an easier decision than not making it. It's leaving the follow list. Let's move on. Next we have a game called Evoke, which is a VR game, so even if it's good, it's still going to stay on the follow list. The question is it even good? Actually, I think it probably is, because what this is offering, most VR games, you're standing in one place shooting things, and maybe you're acting as a tower, and it's a tower defense game. I would say the art style here is different, more cartoony, and you have a shield, which you often don't have in VR games like this, and you're also using a wand to shoot projectiles further away. So while this game really has no relevancy, nobody has reviewed it at all, and it's been out since November 18th, 2018, it's still maybe a good idea for a game. If I was to buy a VR headset, this would be something I would consider, at least until I found something similar to this, either in its cartoon art style or similar to it in its gameplay style. And there's hundreds, if not thousands, of VR games that are similar to it in its gameplay style, but very few in the art style. So I'll leave this on the fall list. And with that, we've done all the games that start with the letter E. And we've done 55 minutes to get to this point. So I think that's good enough. There's really no reason to continue and do all the games that start with the letter F. As long as every video is at least 10 minutes long, it's fine. And some of these videos are going to be 4 hours long. It's just going to be really inconsistent. When we get to games that start with the letter T, we'll separate it between games that start before THE and then games that start after THE, because there's going to be a lot of games that are called the something, the blank. But for now, we are done. That's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. When you subscribe to any channel on YouTube, you need to click that notification bell or you won't get notifications. Even if you do click the bell, you still may not get notifications. So in that case, there's a bunch of social media sites like Twitter and Facebook, links down below in the description. So whatever you're looking at and whatever you follow, you can also follow me on that. And then if you want to support my channel more, which would be very helpful, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and gift me a gift card, or gift me a game you'd like to see me cover. And if you don't know how to pick, well, guess what? What we've been doing is curating the wish list. Once you've friended me, you can gift me a game off my wish list. Which is, again, super helpful for trying to run a channel where I'm trying to cover live games. That's it for this recording. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.